Well, Jonathan Conricus is a former spokesperson for the IDF, now a senior fellow at the Foundation for Defence of Democracies. Thank you so much, Mr. Conricus, for joining us here on the programme. I just want to first get your reaction to our report there.
Yes, it's an interesting. Thank you and good evening for having me on. It's been a while since I was last on Sky UK. I think it's an interesting report, and I think it reflects, one part of how ugly, difficult, and horrible fighting in densely populated urban terrain is. And I think that what this young man, who I saw the last part of the episode of the interview, he looks like a more or less genuine man. I don't think he's motivated by anything sinister, but I think he's reflecting on how difficult it is to fight in such an area and what the challenges are on the battlefield. And beyond what the IDF's response, which you dutifully and professionally put in full length, and that's good, I'd say the following for people at home to be able to understand the complexity. When was the last time that anyone saw a Hamas operative, that we would refer to as terrorist, fighting in uniform? I don't recall Hamas fighting in uniform for the last year and a half. The only time that they've been in uniform is when they have been handing over hostages or in parades. And I think that's very important for people to understand that, unfortunately, there's no boundary, there's no distinction between civilian and military.
Are you comparing the actions of the IDF to what Hamas is doing and what Hamas has done? Because, if we talk about the IDF talks about being, one of the most moral armies on the planet, a responsible army. What we're seeing now, not just citing our report here, but Haaretz, one of the flagship newspapers in Israel, Israeli investigative reporters, talking about this being a widespread issue. It's not just about our report. We're now hearing more and more soldiers coming out and saying this. Are we seeing a breakdown in the chain of command of the IDF?
No, far from it. And I think you're citing two sources that are, the Haaretz report was widely condemned, and many times I've had credit for and respect of Haaretz, but I think this report was very, very politically motivated and founded again on anonymous sources that were not speaking up and were not providing any claims. And since the claims are interesting and they fall into the narrative that is very popular here on Sky and many other outlets, which seeks to put blame and responsibility on Israel, it is widely amplified. I think that it is far from truth.
I mean, if I can just...
I'll just continue.
Conricus, I just want to point out...
I would just like to continue and the answer, because at the bottom line, we are fighting in an environment which is tactically almost impossible to maintain clear lines and distinction.
What we're talking about here, Mr. Conricus, is not a combat zone. We're talking about people coming, civilians coming to seek aid.
No, we are talking about a combat zone. We are indeed talking about the combat zone.
Let's talk about the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, where the IDF comes to, mans and controls the area where civilians come to get food. On June 11th, we saw 57 people killed. On June 17th, 59 people killed. On June the 29th, around 50
allegedly, according to Hamas numbers.
On June 29th, 31 Palestinians were killed.
Yes, all of those are allegedly, according to Hamas numbers.
To get food. So, Mr. Conricus, I mean, the fact is that whether or not you condemn our report or Haaretz's report, the point is that should the IDF not be taking responsibility for the actions of its soldiers?
No, I think you're very, very mistaken. And all of the numbers that you said, I think you should professionally say that this is allegedly and according to Hamas sources. And let's be clear who we're citing and referencing. I know that it's very tempting to use Hamas numbers as if they are true, but this is a terrorist organization that abducts civilians, murders people, and then lies about it in the media.
And you're
sitting there. And you're sitting there and saying as if those are true numbers.
So I would caution. These are Israeli investigative journalists who are saying it. It's a flagship Israeli newspaper that's talking about it. We've seen the IDF soldier in our report saying it. So you can sit there and condemn the soldier, you can condemn the Haaretz report, and you can say that these numbers of people who are dead may not be true. But do you not believe that the IDF should take responsibility for all of this?
I'll tell you what I believe. I'll tell you that I believe that the Israeli forces are fighting in a densely populated urban area where the enemy, Hamas, is using civilians as human shields, masquerades as civilians on the battlefield, and you are terribly mistaken. Hold on, you made quite a long monologue, and I would be really grateful if I could kind of get in a half an answer here.
But
yeah, and I will address it.
You're deflecting on what Hamas is doing.
No, I'm trying to answer your allegations, which are masquerading as a question, and I'm trying to answer the question by being factual. What I think it's clear to anybody who is looking at the situation from an objective point of view, Hamas uses civilians, hides among civilians, and doesn't distinguish between itself and the civilian population. We've seen this before the war and throughout the war. That needs to be the foundation of understanding.
To get food.
But that needs to be the foundation of the understanding before we get into what's happening on the ground. And anything is a battlefield in Gaza.
When I read you these numbers, do you accept that civilians, dozens and dozens of civilians have been killed trying to get aid?
I know that there have been instances, yes, where there's been shots fired and there have been violence at the distribution sites. I fear that, the organization that stands to gain from it, it's not the IDF and it's not Israel. The organization that is trying to dismantle the independent provision of aid to Gazans is Hamas. And they are the ones who have been instigating events on the ground. So I think that is very important context for viewers to be able to know. I always ask myself, who stands to gain from a certain situation? From the disruption of humanitarian aid.
We've got about a minute or so left, but can I ask you, do you believe that soldiers within the IDF who have committed these crimes, and we've seen the likes of Ehud Olmert say that war crimes have been committed, a former Prime Minister of Israel,
without
do you believe that these soldiers should be prosecuted?
Most definitely, whenever an Israeli, and that, by the way, has already happened. We've had Israeli soldiers that have been reprimanded. We have them relieved from duty, even officers. Whenever there has been wrongdoing, and that unfortunately is part of war everywhere, British troops, American troops, whenever you fight, sometimes people make mistakes and sometimes there's wrong judgment, and then there's investigations, and then people face consequences, and that has already happened.
Should the IDF be accountable? And was there a breakdown in the chain of command here?
No, far from it. As much as you would want that to be the picture, I hate to disappoint you, that is not the situation. And one or two reports or anonymous stories do not paint a full picture. The picture is Hamas using civilians as their human shields, Hamas abusing the civilian population, and Israel being forced to fight in an environment where it's almost impossible to distinguish between who is a combatant and who isn't. Israel tries to do that. I think Israel goes to tremendous lengths in order to minimize that. And again, when was the last time that you reported of a Hamas combatant firing weapons in uniform? When did you last see a Hamas video?
I'm not sure the point you're making. What we're seeing here is IDF soldiers coming out in reports by Israeli reporters, by our journalists on the ground in Israel, saying that these crimes are being committed. We're showing you the numbers of civilians being killed, trying to simply get aid and food, whether they arrive early, whether they arrive late, whether they arrive on time.
Provided.
We see the death toll continue to rise.
I think you're cherry-picking information.
On the ground in Gaza.
I think you're very much cherry-picking information because you failed to mention that more than 50 million meals have been provided over the last 4 weeks.
Well,
and those are the same Palestinians who you claim are crowding to get food. I think that's important information for your viewers to be aware of, and the fact that you're not reporting it is not really good, not part of the story.
We've been reporting about the blockade, the aid blockade that lasted
but have you reported about 40 million meals that have been provided?
And we've been reporting about the number of people killed trying to get aid when the UN and various other charities and aid organizations haven't been able to get their trucks in, haven't been able to get their supplies in. And you've put in place this Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, which is, shrouded in controversy in the way that they've handled the aid.
Which is providing food to the people who need it, directly to those who need it, not to Hamas,
Seen the number
not to
of people
corrupt
killed,
UN organizations,
spike
but it
since
is
this
providing
organization has
it.
come
It is
into.
providing it directly to the people who need it. And of course, you are upset, and of course, UNRWA is upset, and of course, many people are upset because this is undermining the control of Hamas over the Gaza Strip. And I understand that there are vested interests, UN and global interest, in keeping the status quo as it is. And what Israel is doing is providing food and is providing humanitarian aid directly to the people who need it. And I think people at home in the UK should understand that more than 40 million meals have been provided in 4 weeks. That's not nothing. That's a lot of food and a lot of honest aid that has been provided.
I think that the statistics and the aid agencies around the world speak for themselves when they talk about the issues that the people of Gaza face. Mr. Conricus, thank you very much for joining us here on the program.
Thank you.